title slide real quick while I introduce Mr. James Holland. James Holland runs a consultancy, Midnight Oil Refinery. Is this correct?
Yeah.
I got it right. That's nice. And he's working on a couple really cool projects right now in the legal industry. That's one area, and also textiles. And he's using Meteor to build out these applications, and he's going to tell you a little bit about that today. Without further ado, let's give it up for James Holland.
Thank you, Brett. So I don't know if we're going to see what's on my computer, but when we do, that's going to be pretty important. So I'm going to introduce Meteor, just sort of do an introduction to it. And the structure that I thought would be most beneficial, at least what I would be most interested in, is I'm going to walk through a lot of code. So what I'd like to do is, if you've got your phone out, go to chadev.meteor.com and register for our little app. And I will show you what I think might be helpful is maybe half of you register, half of you watch, then half of you register, and half of you watch. But if you kind of take a look, Meteor is JavaScript on both sides. And if you don't know Meteor, there's a really good introduction to Meteor. There's a video that is in the sort of pre-notes for the meetup. So I definitely suggest check that out. It's about 40 minutes long, and it's by the founder of the Meteor development group. But Meteor is loosely coupled packages written on top of Node.js, and then a bunch of helpers and functionality. So as soon as we get some folks logging in, we can see that we've got one extra user registered, and hopefully they take the poll very soon. But we got 5 users registered. We've got a couple of different people taking polls. So what I wanted to kind of talk through is the reactivity of meteors. So as we go through this, I'm going to try and explain some of the base concepts, and we're going to talk a lot more than the actual code that's written. So as we walk through the code, I hope that you'll take an appreciation for how little code is required to make some really cool functionality like this going on. So we'll let that keep going. You can feel free to log in on your phone and check all that out, but I think that's pretty cool. So the first thing is your Meteor project structure. So first off, in your directory, there's a command line tool, Meteor, and you can just create a new app. This works like most frameworks. What that's going to do is spit out a baseline directory that most people end up deleting most of. What is really important is your Meteor build folder, your directory here. And I'll kind of walk through some of this stuff. So if we look through the Meteor directory, the purpose of Meteor is duality. So you write all of your code in one place, and then some of it goes to the server and some of it goes to the client. Or in fact, you're running the same code on both the client and the server. So Meteor is going to build as I run my local development, which there's a command line, as you might assume. Meteor run. As I run that, it's going to keep kind of rebuilding for me. But if you wanted, you can dig into all of the local files and sort of see your build. So what I've got is I've got my packages that I'm going to include. Oops, daisies. So when you create a Meteor project, these are all the base packages that are going to be included in your framework. And I've already uncommented these two, which we'll talk more about what each of them does. But Meteor's data is MongoDB, and you publish the same data, actually a subset of your data, to the client. And so you run queries on the client very quickly without making any calls to the server. And auto-publish publishes everything to the client. So we're going to remove that because we want to kind of control what gets published to the client. And Insecure allows us to write, it says right there, it allows us to do DB writes directly from the client. And we want to control who can insert, who can update documents. So we're going to comment that out. For prototyping, you leave those in, they're super fast. Then these are these are packages that we've added ourselves. So there's a lot of community packages. There's a stratosphere called Atmosphere that you can go and download. It's like NPM. Because Meteor is built on top of Node, you can use any NPM packages as well. So there's a lot to choose from as far as modularity and packages in there. We're just going to add these two up at the top as some basic styling for us. Then we've got flow router, which is a router for us, Blaze layout for a layout, and Mongol is actually a development tool. We're not going to see any of that today. And then some custom packages to kind of walk through that sort of stuff. So here I've added my packages. I can add any of the packages that I want by just doing the command line tool again, so that would be my package name. And then Meteor will go out to Atmosphere, fetch the latest version, or if I have a local package, it'll look in the local directory. That local directory is packages, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I can see all of my package versions here. Versioning's, obviously very important for dependency, my latest Meteor version. So for the most part, that's it in my build. So we talk about duality. Meteor does have a little bit of a naming convention here where anything within a client directory is sent to the client but not to the server. So views and templates, things that the server will have no concept of, those go in the client directory. Things that are in the server directory are sent to the server but not sent to the client. Public is going to be assets, or if you had a build for your style sheets, or some JavaScript that for whatever reason you didn't want to include it in the build here. Private is not going to get sent anywhere. Packages is what it is. Lib is a little bit unique. As Meteor builds your app, anything in a lib directory is going to be built before other directories. So you can see really convoluted document tree, or directory trees at some point where people have lib folders kind of all over the place. And they're doing a lot to clean that up and normalize how you control the build order. But what most people end up doing anyway is packaging everything. And when you package everything, you can control your build order that way. So let's go through this. If I look at also in my root folder, I've got my index. So the entry to my app is really, really small. I might add these would be referenced to my public directory. If I had an outside API that I needed to pull in or something like that. But otherwise, there's nothing in body. My templates are all going to get injected into there. And Meteor, when it deploys, is going to inject everything up above the first meta. It's going to inject all of the JavaScript and the CSS that it built for me. So if I take a look over here, then I can see that when it deploys, here's my character set, and then Meteor's injected everything above that. So my index is very simple to write. Then we've got my settings. These are your environment variables, and you can create multiple different files. They're just JSON files. And I'm going to not commit them because they're going to include third-party API keys and things like that. So I'm going to not include any of them except maybe my sample one. But as an example, in my development environment, these might be the keys that I'm going to have. So again, with duality, in the settings document, we've got public object, we've got private, and then we've got mandrel. And actually, private and mandrel are going to act the same way. It's only convention that I create private. But anything that is within public is going to be sent as an environment variable to the client. So we can access any of these in our code. We can access any of them with just Meteor settings public. So as an example here, whoops-a-daisies, I can look at Meteor settings public, and there's Google. So I have access to that variable. And that's going to give me whatever I've got here in my production. Everything else is going to be private. It's going to be server level. But just to kind of keep things organized, I usually create a private and then put everything in there. But just as an illustrative purpose, the mandrel stuff's not going to get sent to the client. That's also private. So now I've got my settings and I've got sort of everything set up. So let's dig in. In my client directory, the first thing I'm really interested ever is the routes. I can learn a lot about the routes. So we know that we added a couple of different packages. Those packages just exposed a little API for us. Flow router and Blaze layout. Flow router has a function route, and you'll kind of put it together yourself, but it takes the first argument, which is the actual route, and then an object of options, which we're only concerned about action. And what this is saying is when I go to the home page, render the layout public, and then main splash. So let's kind of dig into that a little bit. Blaze layout, the first argument is a layout, and then the second argument is an object with the variables and other template names. So these actually all relate to templates. So if I look at my public layout, this is what Blaze layout's going to inject into the body when I visit my home route. Most of that's my own little write-up. What's important is template name public. And then template dynamic template equals main. That's a Meteor. That's actually a Meteor insert. So real quick on the templating. Meteor just launched in September 1.2, which now supports Angular and React directly. But they also have their own templating, which is built on top of handlebars, which they call spacebars, which is implemented as Blaze. And so this is Blaze, but this is just templating with handlebars, so an include for a template. And template.dynamic is a Meteor-specific thing. That's not a Blaze layout thing, so everyone's got access to that. And what that's going to take is one parameter, which is going to be the template, and then a string for whichever name we want to inject there. So in this case, I'm injecting a variable main, and to go back to our app, that's going to just inject the template splash. Good so far? If I wanted to, I could have for all sorts of things like that, and I could just include multiple here. This one could be, for example, navigation, and then back over here, I could do another one like that. So all the same, I can build it in as many different directions as I want. So looking at Splash, pretty simple. That's what we all saw when we went to chadev.meteor.com. So no big deal there. Now if I go back, let's see what my public ones are. So I was able to go into login, and I was able to go to sign up. And then we recognize action. We're pretty familiar now with how these act. So we don't know where login and sign up templates are. They don't show up here. We're going to get to that a little bit later. I've extracted those to a package already. But we do have triggers, enters. So trigger enter is part of the object of options that we're allowed to pass in with every time before I visit this URL. So what I like to do, because I tend to reuse triggers over and over again, is extract those to an object and then have that available. So here's my route triggers object. This is something completely up to me. But every trigger is going to be passed in two variables, context and redirect. The context is going to contain a couple of different properties that FlowRouter gives us about the path, and then redirect is a function that's just going to take a redirect path if we wanted to call that. So my redirect app trigger that I'm calling is that if the Meteor has a user ID. So that functionality comes to us through the accounts package. We'll get to that a little bit later, but essentially I'm just checking here saying if it's a logged in user, redirect them to app. And then you can see below redirect anonymous. That trigger, you haven't seen that be called yet, but that's going to be called on any of my app pages. I'm just going to say if they're not a user logged in, redirect them to login. So we can build this in a number of different ways. This is just sort of a simple implementation of that. So there's my public. So now let's go to, these are very simple. I want to be kind of conscious of time, but a log out, this is just going to log me out. I can do some callback error handling, and then a 404, whoops, daisies, route not found. I can redirect somebody to the home URL or something like that. So I've started setting up my routes, so we're kind of feeling good about that. So let's take a look at the app routes. So once I get logged in, I go to app, but I want to have a more dynamic structure than that. So FlowRouter lets me set up groups, and then I'm just going to use those groups like I would write the rest of the routes. So again, a lot of repetition. I can prefix all of my routes. So this route is actually app poll. Seems very simple, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to render here the app layout, and then I'm going to inject poll wherever it says main. So let's take a look at what my app layout looks like. Very simple, kind of self-explanatory. We've been there before. But let's look at this JS. So part of the convention is that with templates, you create instance-based JavaScript. So my template is going to run JavaScript when that template instance exists, but otherwise not going to be running. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to create subscriptions for data. And the server is going to publish that data to us. It's going to be very particular about what data it publishes to us. And as a client, we can subscribe to any of these publications. So in this case, whenever the template instance of app is created, then I'm going to subscribe to the user's publication, which we need to go take a look and see what that is. But there are five different methods on the, well, some are property, but methods on the template. I've got, for whatever my template.name is, I've got helpers, we'll talk about them. Events, we'll talk about those. OnCreated, OnDestroyed, and OnRendered. And OnRendered is where you might initiate like a modal or some sort of a front-end sort of UI component that you want just specific for that template. So what is that subscription? That comes over to my server. So on server, I've written a publication. Any client can subscribe to this. So we want to make sure that we do our proper security within here before we actually return any information here. As I said, Meteor is written on top of Mongo, but they've actually just started implementing support for SQL. So it's coming. There are a lot of people who are really hoping that that'll come along a little bit faster because Mongo isn't suited for everything. But the first thing that I'm going to check, we had the Meteor user ID function back in the method, well, back in our routes. And in publish, it's a little bit unique. There's actually some talk on GitHub right now about trying to bring those two together. But I'm doing the same thing here. I'm just checking if it's not a user, I need to return that this is ready, that this publication is ready. Otherwise, I'm going to return from the Meteor users collection, the Mongo collection. And then anybody that's familiar with Mongo, this kind of stuff looks a little bit familiar. I'm going to find all of the users, and I'm just going to return their usernames. So on the client, I can actually look at this. I can say Meteor users find fetch. And actually, you probably know Meteor users.find is actually just a cursor, so it's not actually any data. It's the query for the data. So if I want the actual data, I need to fetch it. And so inside of here, I've got all of my users who have subscribed. But I've only published users' names, except for this first object. The first object's a little bit unique. This one is mine, and so I've published additionally the emails, the profile. And Meteor, the account system for setting up users, is going to, by default, publish these to me as this user to the client. I can override that if I want. But everyone else, because our publication only returns their username, but it returns everyone's, I've got everybody's username and their user ID. I can also choose to exclude their user ID if I wanted to. OK, so let's figure out where we are on packages. So as I said, we kind of package everything. So where's my login and my sign up? We'll start first off and talk about what a package is. So in the local packages directory, I can create a package for anything. And what I'm going to do is have all the messy internals of that package, and then I'm going to export whatever global variables I want that package to be able to interact with other packages. So in this particular case, I'm not exporting anything, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. What I do need to do, though, is add this package to my app. So I've already added this local package, whatever it was called, ChaDev accounts. So I've added that, and which is why it shows up in my .meteor packages file. So now I need to use other packages. So this package itself is dependent on other packages. Accounts password is a Meteor. Actually, all of these that don't start with a developer username and then a colon, these are all Meteor-based packages. So I've got ECMAScript, which uses Babel to convert ES6. I've got templating, which allows me to do my views. I've got accounts password, which is going to have some other dependent packages, but that's my user authentication system. And then for each one, I can specify what environment I want it to exist on. If I don't add a second argument, then it's going to exist on both my server and my client. So in this case, templating I only want on the client. Then what I'm going to do is, as I create files, I'm going to register them with the package. Otherwise, the package doesn't know they exist. And I'll do the same thing. I'll register the files and then the environment that I want them to exist on. And that's just going to take an array of files. So pretty easy to follow. Then there's all sorts of testing capability, which we won't get into today, but we can do a lot of testing on package basis or on an app basis as well. So we knew that I came in to my login HTML. I added this template on this /login route. So let's take a quick look at this. Really basic, just a login form. I've got a JS file, so if I take a look at that, okay, I've got something new. I've got my events. So events takes an object with a list of different events. And this is actually ES6, but it all works the same. This is the same thing. So there are certain event handlers that Meteor is going to be listening to. And then my second, after the space, I'm going to add in any selectors that I want in order to identify that. And it's specific to my template. So I might have forms all over the app, but this is really just looking for the form within the login template, which I think is pretty cool. And then you've got submit, click, change, blur, key up, key down, all that kind of stuff that I can listen for. My function is going to take the event as well as the template instance, and so I'm just going to process that pretty simply. I'm just going to say, don't actually submit the form, go ahead and get the values. There's no error handling on our little app, really no error handling, so I'm just going to throw some errors if I don't have any of that stuff, and then I'm going to call this function, which comes through the Meteor accounts, package. There's documentation for all of that, docs.meteor.com. Anyway, it takes a callback. Or I'm going to flow router go. So there's another method for flow router, is I can redirect at any point. I can redirect to another URL. Okay, so that was pretty simple. What does my sign up look like? Again, really basic form. We're just kind of taking in some data. Again, submit the form. Here I'm going to kind of build it. I'm going to just call a different function, new user. So I'm going to create a new user. On that note with the Meteor accounts, so Meteor accounts also lets us set up some server-side stuff. So these functions are going to be called when my new user is created, but on the server side. So in case my client didn't pass in some sort of information that is protected, or if they tried to include additional information, then I can change all of that on the server side here. So again, just real basic, kind of making sure that everything's included. And on the server object, you're passing in a username, an email, and a profile object that's going to have all your, if you wanted to collect their first name or something like that. In this particular case, that's the only thing that is allowed in on accounts create. So if I passed in roles, say my user object has a roles subdocument, and I pass that in, then Meteor is going to kick that out right away. So one of the things that I might do here is I might add in some baseline roles. I might add in Stripe.js, customer account ID numbers, things like that. And I'm going to reset the user profile. So because that's allowed, anything that they sent in, anything that the client sent in, a user profile, I'm just going to go ahead and reset all that to null. So server and client both kind of running here. And that's it for my accounts package. So with all that done, I've got user accounts and passwords. The other thing that we had in our app was we got our poll. So let's go into poll and let's see where that all exists. Now, I just created one module, my little replies module. So if we go into the package and we look at that first, what we can see here, I've given the package description details. Here's what I'm including, templating, reactive error. So I can either pass a string or I can pass an array of packages to include. Moment.js to deal with some timing stuff. I'm going to register all these files, In this particular case, I included to be explicit about client and server. I could have just left that off, and it would have registered on both of them. But I am also going to export. I'm going to export something this time. So anything that interacts with this package now is going to have access to the replies variable, but none of the other internals of the package. So what is replies? It's just a Mongo collection. So I can now do updates and inserts on my Mongo collection. I'd be able to see that here. Let me actually come on down here. So here's my replies. And since I've exported this from my package, added this package to my app, I have access to it here on the client. So I could do an insert. And what we should see is that it's going to insert it here just briefly, and then it's going to take it away. Hopefully everybody could kind of see that right there at the bottom. It's going to insert it, and it's going to take it away. So what's happening is, well, for two reasons, but one, we removed that insecure package, you remember? We had insecure, and that's allowing me to make writes to the database directly from the client. And since we've removed that, we can't do that anymore. But what else is happening is that Meteor has this concept of the optimistic UI, this idea that they assume that your writes and that your methods that you're performing on the client, they assume that you're allowed to do those. And then whatever the server gets back, or the client is going to receive a response from the server whether or not, and it's going to correct itself. So it's going to assume that I'm able to write that, but then it's going to get back from the server that I'm not allowed to write that, and it's going to update the UI. Oh, just in this, I would normally include a schema structure. There's a very popular package, simple schema, but in this case, we know that these are the fields that I've got. So let's dig into our client and let's to our views, and let's figure out what poll is. So here's our template poll. Again, very simple, but we got something new here. Again, a little bit of templating logic, unless, else, and unless. But template subscription is ready. So that's a Meteor helper that's given to everybody with the Meteor templating. And what that's going to do is it's going to wait until it receives a ready message back from the server that your subscription for data has completed, you're ready to go. That's why we send the this.ready if somebody's not allowed. Then it's going to receive that back and show loading. Otherwise, it's going to come through here, and it's going to show us template with template variable and data with reply, which we need to kind of get a handle on what template and data shake out to be. So again, here we go. In our helpers, that's just like events. It's an object with a bunch of functions. So that's actually just a function. That's actually just a function. Template and reply. But first, let's look at the subscription. So again, for this particular template instance, as long as the poll instance is available, then we're going to subscribe to the user reply. So in this package, if I come to my server publications, here are my publications, user reply. If it's not a user, kick them out. Otherwise, get my user ID as this.userid. That's duplicitous. I don't really need to do that. And then this is just a Mongo query. I'm going to go ahead and find everything that was created by me and return that. My helpers, so these are my variables, template and reply. Template's doing some crazy stuff here, but reply is very simple. Reply is just going to say, go ahead and find the item that was returned by me. So I've subscribed to that data, but I haven't actually made it available to my particular template. So now I'm going to find it. For Mongo, if you don't know, reply.find and reply.find1. Find is going to return the cursor. Find1 is going to return an array of your, or an object of your, it's going to return an object with the data for that, for the first one that it found. So let's look at what's happening in here. Editing reply equals session.get editing. So we got to get kind of an understanding about that. That has to do with Meteor's reactivity. Let's walk through the rest of it really quickly. Has reply, so again, we're just going to find if they're one. If editing reply, so if that first expression is truthy, then we're going to return the edit template. Otherwise, if it doesn't have a reply, return the question template. Otherwise, return the replies template. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, you can probably walk through kind of the logic of this. But let's understand this get editing thing. So I'm editing my poll right now. Template helpers are reactive, and in Meteor, reactivity session set kicks in. As soon as the session variable editing is changed, my UI function is going to run again, and I'm going to get a different view. We can see that right here. In my editing, when I do session, editing to null, which is going to re-render the poll template, the function actually. Let's go into the question. This is all really basic. One new thing that we've got here, template question onCreated, which takes a function that's going to run when the template's created, is that I've now created a variable for this instance called tried. I'm going to access it here, template.instance tried. So I've created a variable, and that's now a reactive variable. So session is a reactive variable that is going to, it's bleeding. It's available throughout the app. But this reactive variable, tried, is only available within this template instance. So there are ways that you can create the same functionality but isolate it to a particular instance. So this is just going to return the value of whatever that's set at. And here's how I'm going to set it. Whenever there's a change on no meteor, which is a checkbox, whenever there's a change, just set it to whether or not it's checked or not, true or false. So that's my connectivity between my reactive variable. And because of that, when I change and I click checked, not checked, it's going to rerun this function, and thus has tried, which shows up here, if has tried. So if that's truthy, it's going to show this. If it's falsy, it's not. And that's how we're kind of connecting all this stuff. I don't think that there's too much to talk about in questions. I'd like to go into replies really quickly, and then we'll wrap it up. Within the replies template, which we saw within the replies, we recognize if template subscription ready. Okay, so that's going to show up. Otherwise, nothing. I'm going to include statistics template, which is irrelevant. It's just at the top. And then I've got my with and my each. So these are a little bit unique, but they should be consistent with handlebars. So they have to do with the data scoping. So I'm going to include this template reply item, and that's just going to be my reply. But then replies is going to be everybody's reply, not equal to mine. Pretty basic. So here my data scope for this template is going to be just me, and here the data scope for that template is going to be each one as it iterates through and through. I've subscribed to 2 different subscriptions, so I can look up in my publications each of those subscriptions. Same sort of filtering that we're doing. Here, I'm just going to find all of them, and then here I'm going to find all of them where make public is true. So Meteor is smart